Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. This is a double edged sword for women across the country. In fact, this is both unfair and fair for women across the country. This episode of Ignition Time is based on this article from the Wall Street Journal. Women are winning the biggest pay raises from the United States labor boom, but despite the gains, women's pay still lags behind pay for women. So, wage growth for American women is increasing at a faster rate than for men. In fact, female wages were up 4.4% in January compared with a year earlier, and this was compared with a 4.1% increase in male wages. So this was the sixth straight month that women's wages actually outpaced men's wages. Now, this is a good thing. Let's take a look at this chart on your screen that shows you the median hourly wages and changes from a year earlier. Now, the magenta color, if you will, represents women's wage gains, which outpace men's gains by the largest difference going back all the way to 1997. Now, these pay gains are actually helping women regain ground. Now, keep in mind that women suffered disproportionately because a lot of women were in low-wage jobs, specifically in personal care, food preparation, and healthcare support. And by the way, there were significant reductions to staffing with all of these industries. Women are in travel, leisure, entertainment, and hospitality. Now, a lot of these businesses started to reopen. In fact, according to Julia Pollack, who's the chief economist at the job site ZipRecruiter, this group of workers who experienced the worst disruption during the pandemic is now also experiencing the fastest recovery in earnings and employment. It's sort of sad that we only see these reversals and any kind of narrowing in the gaps when the labor market is extraordinarily unusually tight. But that is typically the pattern. Now, women who actually switch jobs are getting huge pay increases. In fact, approximately 31% of women who changed jobs during the pandemic got a compensation package, that is a salary and bonus, that was 30% higher than in their previous role. So this is a good thing. Now, this gender gap has actually shrunk slightly, the gap between men and women over the past 2 decades, because more and more women have entered high-paying white-collar professions. But there's still a wide gap between both men and women. In fact, last year, the median weekly earnings for full-time female workers amounted to 83.1% of men's earnings. In fact, women's annual average weekly pay as a percentage of men's, let's take a look at this graph on your screen. Let's take a look at all women. You can start to see that women's median weekly earnings are 83.1% of men's earnings. That is an almost 17%, almost 17% gap between men and women. In fact, we can even break this down to black women, Hispanic women, white women, and Asian women. What's really interesting is that the gap between men and women is significant for black women and Hispanic women, but it exists to a lesser extent among white women. This is very interesting because there's one big factor behind the gender pay gap. Women tend to occupy jobs that pay less on average. In fact, women account for more than 75% of workers in 8 of the 20 occupations with the lowest weekly job earnings. That includes occupations like hostess, housekeeper, and hairdresser. And women are more likely than men to also work part-time because 62% of part-time workers in the workforce in February of this year were women. These jobs are also lower paying jobs in sectors like retail. In fact, let's take a look at this image on your screen. Women made up more than half of all workers in education and healthcare services, leisure and hospitality, and financial services. Wages and employment in these sectors have grown. So that's a good thing. Let's take a look at the median hourly wages changed from a year earlier in finance and business services, in leisure and hospitality, in education and health services. And let's take a look at the cumulative change in jobs since December 2019 for professional and business services. They have recovered. Leisure and hospitality have not recovered, and education and health services have not yet recovered. So what is happening here, folks, is that also mothers often take time out of the workforce, which can lead to pay cuts. And many women actually left the labor force during the pandemic to care for children because a lot of schools and daycares were shut down throughout the country. Now, there are factors that are bringing women back to work, including higher wages, the pandemic is easing, and fewer childcare disruptions. So the labor force participation rate for what are called as prime age women, this is classified as women aged between 25 and 54 working or seeking a job. It actually climbed to 75.8% in February, which was up from 74.9% a year earlier. Now, despite all of this, folks, there are still fewer women age 16 and up in the labor force compared to before the pandemic. Meanwhile, for males, the labor workforce participation has completely recovered. The majority of women who actually are considering returning to work say that they want good pay, health insurance, and job security, as you might expect. However, many women say that they lack these types of benefits. In other words, there's a big gap between what women want, what they say they need, and what employers actually provide, according to Nicole Mason, who's the president of IWPR. And IWPR is the Institute for Women's Policy Research. In fact, Nicole said this: being able to close that gap, I think, is going to be critical in terms of women's labor workforce participation. And finally, let's take a look at this image on your screen, the civilian labor workforce level, the change from February 2020. You can start to see that men have actually come back into the workforce relative to prior to the pandemic, and women have not yet essentially come back into the workforce with the same level of thrust, if you will, as men have. In other words, a lot of women have actually dropped out of the workforce permanently. And this is in many ways the unfair aspect of employment for women across the country. Remember, these are national trends. So your state, your region, your town may be a little bit different, but these are national trends that reflect how unfair the situation is for women, even though women's wages are increasing faster than men. There's still a lot of work to be done to bring back some semblance of gender equality to the employment situation, to the workforce in the United States of America. Thank you so much for watching. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda with Ignition Time. This right here is a little bit of information about me. You'll learn more about who I am, what my journey has been like, and why you should listen to me. I appreciate you. This is my Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is ignition_time. That's ignition_time. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.